Welcome to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, I would appreciate it if you went back and viewed previous episodes when you get time to get the gist of the podcast. Well, I hope everybody's doing good today. My day, I got to tell you because it's burning me up. My day started off a little bit different. I had an unruly passenger, and I was trying to be a good, respectful driver, and the guy just wanted to be. He just didn't understand, that I was going one way. He was trying to give me directions, but I was trying to tell him if you're going to give me directions, that's fine. I'll go whatever way you want me to go. But you have to give me directions that aren't, like you tried to have me do a U-turn and go the wrong way on a one-way street. So it was like, and then he got kind of upset with me because I raised my voice because it is my vehicle. And then it was back and forth. And I ended up having to end his ride because I was like, I'm not, right now, I'm not doing this. And just to dwell on this real quick, you get passengers like that. They're just, just jerks kind of, and just, are kind of prima donnas and expect, everything to go their way. And, as a driver, you're not supposed to say anything. And it's like, dude, we're not doing this right now. So, had a little bit of a sketch there, I got that done, but you never know with Lyft and rideshare. They're notorious for deactivating their drivers for no reason. So who knows? I really don't even concern myself with it right now. It's rideshare, and that's part of the business. Don't get me wrong. It's a good position because, this guy was kind of like risk, and there's no job security. So that's why a lot of people, they can deactivate you, and they don't give you any type of way to fight it or whatever. I think you're fighting with AI, to be honest. I'm not deactivated yet, but it was just an incident that happened. I picked up this guy, right? And come to find out he was from India. So we're standing there and we're talking and everything. And we had a pretty good conversation because he was upset about the price of whatever he paid last time he was here. And at first I was kind of like, okay, maybe I'm missing something here, because as far as I know, prices have gone up and up and up and up. And he was, kind of tripping at first. So we kept talking and everything. And he started telling me about he was from India. And he kept asking me, how much are these houses? And I think it was over in Inkster. So we kept talking, and, we were discussing things. And I finally told him, I said, well, this is my monthly expenses. My monthly expenses are about $4,000. And that's, a car payment, that's everything. So he said, wow, $4,000? I said, yeah, it's just, you know, not that much, really. And then, and he was asking me, how much do you need to retire? And I said, well, you got to think about it. If you want to live like you're living now, then, you definitely need to, uh, figure out something, some type of income or something like that. And then we talked about the railroad that I used to work for, and we talked about railroad retirement. And when I told him about railroad retirement and what that pays you when you retire, and for those of you who don't know, railroad retirement pays you about, I want to say somebody told me 45,000, and then you can add in your Social Security. I think that might be 45,000, including your Social Security, because that's what railroad retirement is. Railroad retirement is basically the same thing as your Social Security. So we're talking, and he says, "Well," that's not really that much." I said, "Yeah, it's you're you're stuck at a point. Let's say you retire and you have, we'll say 60,000, right? So my thing is, you're at a point where you can barely afford the life that you had before you retired. Now that you retired, you can't afford uh, like low income housing, senior citizen living, which is subsidized, and things of that nature. And you have to be a certain age. You've reached that age, but you make too much money. So you're kind of on top of the fence somewhat, because you can stay in the same exact apartment that you were staying in while you were working 80 hours a week. But the only thing is, now you can only afford to, you know, pay rent, do this, do that, whatever, and that's all you can afford. Before, when you were working, you could afford a couple extras, this, that, and the other. But now you really can't afford that. So we got into another conversation because this was a decently uh, sized ride. So we had plenty of time to talk. So I started telling him about, because he asked me, what was the point you think when things kind of went haywire? And I told him, I said, well, it started in 2000. We'll go from there. So in 2000, I was making, I think, 1185. So at that point in time, the only thing I've ever wanted to do was make good money. So, you're working and you're working and you're working. And then, we got a couple raises. And I think by the time I left in 2015, just 15 years, I was making 1585. So if you think over 15 years, I went from 1185 to 1585. I mean, I won't even say anything about that. So fast forward to when I moved here to Southfield, because I was in Kalamazoo. I'm in Southfield now. Fast forward, I was working for the railroad, and railroad, I think CSX pays, I think, like 40 an hour. Sounds like a lot of money, but you have to remember, any job you get, you have to do the math on the taxes. So whatever you're making, you can pretty much cut that in half. And then the union and whoever else, they all, fucking nickel and dime you to death. Every union is broke. Every union is like, well, if you could donate this and pay this money and pay, I said, look, dude, I'm paying my union dues. Michigan is a right to work state. So regardless of what union you're in, if the company decides they can let you go for any reason they want to, period. I mean, the union can strike, but what are you going to do? Go on strike and lose your job and everybody else for strike pay? And you got to stand outside and barbecue all day? No, absolutely not. So the last check that I got from there was $8,000. Now, I'll let you give you a quick minute to guess how much I brought home. For those of you who didn't get it, I only brought home $8,000. $8,000 was what it took me probably almost 4 months to make when I was in Kalamazoo. So in my mind, I was done with overtime and all that kind of stuff because you have to do the math and say, okay, when I wasn't making any money, and I'm paying these taxes, all I want to do is make money. Now that I'm making money, the taxes that I'm paying are what it would have took me 3 months to make when I wasn't making any money. So it just makes you think about, does that make any sense? So later on in the conversation, he was telling me, he had mentioned before that his son was here in Detroit, and he was going to school, but he didn't say anything about what he was going to school for. So I said, okay, what is your son going to school for? Because I'm wondering, in my mind, like, okay, you own a business, what you got, a software engineering business, because he asked me, you know anybody who's a software engineer? I said, I went to school for PC, but so we got it more into the conversation. He said his son was here going to school for he was going to go to school for pre-med. I said, okay, that's pretty cool. And I'm still sitting there wondering, like, okay, is your why isn't your son working for you? Why isn't he getting a check? Why is he here in the U.S.? Why did he move from India? So we kept talking, and he says, oh, his son works for like a grocery store and a restaurant. He's doubling up. I said, okay, still wondering why. And so we kept talking. He kept asking me, well, how much is that house right there? $50,000? I said, yeah, in your dreams. I said, the most rundown house is going to cost you $50,000. And that's a house with no windows. You're going to have to gut the whole thing and redo it. That's all you're going to get for $50,000 right now. I've watched the housing market go from, I think it's 2015, it was like 160 for a house. Then it went to 250. Now it's, $500,000 for, for 3,000 square foot house. So he kept asking me about the neighborhood and where I live. So I told him about my apartment. Started off at $729. Now it's like 8 something, which is still lower than what you would pay in the surrounding area. So we kept talking, and he was telling me about, and I kind of threw it out there like, hey, I'm looking for something. He's a businessman. Hey, maybe I can get a job. I'm always looking for different avenues. But I think he was trying to reel me in, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. We kept talking, and he finally said, after we had this whole conversation, and then he finally said, well, no, I know what I did. I asked him, is the cost of living in India cheaper than U.S.? So he said, yeah. He said in India, over there they make, $400 a month or something like that. I said, oh, okay. that explains why sites like Fiverr, where they do things, and they'll whip up a video for like $5 or something like that, because $5 to them in India is big bucks, in India. So he said, yeah, an apartment over there was like, it's like, $300 or 350 or whatever. So I said, okay, over here, as you can see, it's a little bit different. So I said, then I stopped him. I said, okay, let me get this straight. If I retire and I'm getting a check here for $2,500, just in between 25 and 3,000, I could live in the suburbs in India. I'm living good. Probably, I don't know, paying same thing I'm paying here, $800 a month. I mean, you're living good in India. And he said, yeah. He said, you're right. Because I'm getting a steady check over here. So then he finally told me. I don't know why he was hiding this, but he said, yeah, he said, my son, who's working at a grocery store and a restaurant, makes more than me, which is, I'm talking about him. He owns a company, flies all over the world. His son works in the U.S. at a grocery store and a restaurant, is doubling up, and now I see why, makes more than his father, who owns a business. I said, oh, okay. Now that makes sense. Now it makes sense as to, son said, why would I work for you? I can just go to the U.S. and make, what you, mom, and grandma made together. I can buy y'all lunch and send you some money, because, it only makes sense, rather than stay over there and only make, $300 a month or $400 a month or whatever. It makes absolutely no sense. But that's their culture. So I can't really say much about that. It's just the way it is, But what I did think about is like, hey, like I said, it would definitely be a good idea to retire over there and then make my what I get on my retirement here in the U.S., it would work for me much better, because my money would go further, because he was like, the apartment and the your food and everything, I mean, less than $1,000 a month. I mean, you can't beat that, But that was the way my rideshare day went. So I'm not, and don't get me wrong, I'm not worried about the job or anything. I wake up every day, I check my phone, see if I'm deactivated and things of that nature. If I am, I got a plan. I'll just go work at Amazon, because they make about the same thing. Although I probably won't like going to work, but it is what it is. And another thing that I really think about sometimes is I talk to people a lot, and I see that I'm fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not making a ton of money. I'm just a big saver, huge saver. I spend a lot too. If you've listened to earlier episodes, you'd be like, well, he's one hell of a spender. But I'm thankful to have the position, and I learned how to change my attitude. Except for this morning, that was like, kind of, everybody has a moment. So Um, Meeting people doing rideshare kind of uh, it gives me a different appreciation, especially right now when when the government is shut down and I think I heard on the radio that people were they're getting evicted and all this other stuff, and it's I don't know it's definitely a dilemma, and I hope that the government opens up pretty soon. But even when the government does open up, I mean, they still have a, they still have to make up for the for that month or that 40 days with no check because your savings is dry. You've dug into other stuff. If you got access uh to your bank and everything, it's like you've if you can get a loan from them, you've done that. If you could, you've tapped out everything. So it's gonna take a minute before you can catch up with all that stuff. It's not just like, oh, okay, the government opens up and, whoop de doo, snap your fingers and everything is back to the way it was. That's just not the way it goes. I mean, that's going to take, if the government's been shut down for 40 days, you know, not to mention the people who've been evicted, it's going to take, you know, I don't know. It's like just a good guess. It'll take probably 3 months for every week that you don't have a paycheck because you have to catch up with that. you know. But those are some things I wanted to get into before we get into this episode's content. But I wanted to get that out of the way. Also, I'm not sure if you can tell on listening, but I did adjust some of my settings because my other podcast episodes uh they were sounding kind of harsh, and also what I was doing. I meant to put this on yesterday's episode, but what I was doing was for those of you who don't know, I have a Shure microphone and a Rodecaster Pro 2 mixer. But what I was doing was I was using the Rodecaster Pro 2, and then I was putting it in WavePad and doing the same stuff again. And it was like I had to finally realize once you use Rodecaster Pro 2, then it's ready. It's ready to be uploaded to whatever site, podcast or whatever, so it's ready. There's really nothing else to be done to it. So now that I realized that, I was still chasing a little bit of a different sound. So I found that if you just a tidbit of information for those of you who are maybe looking to kind of upgrade your voice a little bit, or should I say soften it. What I did was I took on the Rodecaster Pro 2, I took the podcast setting, and then I went over to reverb. And in reverb, for me, it's on a large hall. The high cut is about halfway. The low cut is halfway, and the level is all the way down. Now, for those of you who may be wondering, because I don't know anything about sound and all that kind of stuff, but what I do know is the level. If you cut the level up, you'll get more echo. the low cut, you want to be at half or better. Usually, I found the sweet spot is between half and like 3/4. So if you want to play with it, right up in that area, and then the same thing with the high cut, half and 3/4. And then the reason that I went with a large hall is I was on a small room, but it just wasn't. It didn't sound the way I wanted to. So what I would suggest that anybody who wants to try out those settings, I would suggest you go to your what do you call it, reverb, and set all your settings, and then start talking, and your knob all the way to the right. Start at a small room, see how it sounds, and then go up, see how it sounds, go up, see how it sounds, and then go up, and then pick whichever one that sounds more to your voice. And then that's what I would go with, because with that little bit of reverb, if you're listening to this podcast, you'll see it sounds much softer. So, and then it kind of takes out a few of the quirks of my voice. Not all of them, but a few of the quirks. So it makes my voice sound much smoother, much more relaxing, and that's the sound that I'm going for. Is the much more relaxed sound. So I wanted to share that information. No updates on the podcast, aka Money Pit, but I wanted to share that information before I get into today's content. But here we go. The hum of the mall was a symphony of chaos, a cacophony of delighted shrieks, the rhythmic squeak of stroller wheels, and the murmur of 1,000 overlapping conversations. For most, it was the vibrant pulse of a Sunday afternoon. For me, it was a complex algorithm I processed with a quiet intensity, a familiar disquiet stirring beneath the surface of my carefully constructed calm. My name is Silas, and I'm a podcaster. Or rather, I was a welder. The sparks of molten metal have been replaced by the flickering glow of a microphone, and my days of forging steel are now spent wrestling with the ethereal, the intangible, the often terrifying landscapes of the human mind. My podcast, The Alchemist's Dream, is my workshop now, where I weave surreal narratives and dreamlike explorations into the fabric of mental health. Today, however, I wasn't in my usual sanctuary of soundproofing and solitude. I was at the 12 Oaks Mall, a sprawling monument to consumerism, for a podcasting convention. The air, thick with the scent of cinnamon pretzels and 100 different perfumes, felt charged with an electric anticipation. It was a gathering of creators, a chance to connect, to share, to maybe even dare, I hope, find a kindred spirit. But as I navigated the throng, my gaze, as it often does, drifted to the periphery, to the vibrant, pulsing heart of the mall, the families. They were everywhere, tiny humans with sticky hands, trailing parents with weary but determined smiles, grandparents with kind, crinkled eyes, their arms laden with shopping bags, mothers pushing triple strollers, their expressions a testament to a love that defied exhaustion. The sheer volume of them, the sheer life they radiated, was overwhelming. As I watched them, a family internal monologue, a dialogue that often plays out in the quieter spaces of my mind, began to unfold, amplified by the surrounding buzz. Look at them. Silas, so intact, a unit, a functioning ecosystem. The voice, my own, yet somehow distinct, began its familiar cadence. It was the voice of observation, the keen eye that sees the patterns, the systems, the inherent logic in things. It was the voice that once analyzed stress fractures in a weld seam, now analyzing the social fabric woven through this mall. And the government, the behemoth, that abstract entity, is shut down, furloughed, a skeletal framework with no one at the helm. And here, Silas, here's the engine still running, the fundamental engine. My mind, like a finely tuned engine itself, began to churn, connecting desperate threads, weaving them into a narrative that felt both absurdly simple and profoundly complex. The government shutdown, a stark, bureaucratic halt, and this swirling, vibrant, messy reality of families. They say governments provide infrastructure, roads, schools, safety nets, essential services. But what is more essential than this? The primal act of creation, of continuation, this self-sustaining unit that requires no congressional appropriation to exist. I found myself leaning against a display of brightly colored sneakers. My shopping bag for the anticipated merch still unopened. My focus narrowed, filtering out the immediate surroundings and concentrating on the conceptual space that was opening up within me. The mall, a microcosm of society, was teeming with these small, powerful republics. Imagine, Silas, the paperwork involved in a government shutdown, the memos, the emails, the endless conferences, the anxiety, the uncertainty, and yet, over there, I mentally gestured toward a young couple wrestling a toddler into a high chair at the food court. There's a different kind of anxiety. A scraped knee, a spilled juice box, a battle over broccoli. But it's contained, it's immediate, it's resolvable. The contrast was stark. The abstract, paralyzing fear of national instability versus the tangible, albeit sometimes frustrating, challenges of daily life. My own inner world, after all, was a constant negotiation with anxieties that often felt as vast and nebulous as the national debt. But the families, they seem to have found a way to anchor themselves, to build their own small, resilient fortress against the storm. The government is a grand, intricate machine designed for efficiency, for order. But when it grinds to a halt, what remains? The fundamental drives, the need for connection, for sustenance. for companionship. And where do you see that most vividly, Silas? Not in the hushed halls of power, but in the boisterous aisles of a department store. I watched a father patiently explain the appeal of a superhero action figure to his son, his voice a low rumble of encouragement. The son, his eyes wide with adoration, clung to his father's hand, a tiny, perfect universe of trust. The essential services they speak of are the truly essential if they cannot replicate. The essential service this father provides in this moment, the reassurance, the guidance, the simple, profound act of being there. I felt a pain, a familiar ache of longing. My own father, a silent titan of industry, had been a man of few words. His affection demonstrated through the steady provision of our needs. But this open, enthusiastic engagement, this was a different language of love. A language that, for all its potential messiness, seemed to speak directly to the heart. The government shutdown is a disruption of the macro, a tremor in the grand architecture. But the micro, Silas, the micro is where resilience is forged. There are the everyday alchemists, turning the lead of mundane existence into the gold of shared moments. I saw a mother, her face etched with weariness, nevertheless bent down to kiss the top of her daughter's head as she struggled with a stubborn shoelace. A minute act of love, a tiny rebellion against the encroaching chaos. The news channels talk of economic fallout, of national pride, and of those are important, undeniably, but they rarely capture the quiet heroism of this. The mother who juggles work, childcare, and a budget tighter than a drum. The father who coaches Little League after a grueling day. These are the unsung architects of society, building their empires, one shared meal, one bedtime story at a time. My thoughts, spiraling like smoke from a welder's torch, began to take on a surreal quality, a hallmark of my podcast. I imagined the government buildings, silent and empty, their ornate facades like the hollow husks of forgotten dreams. And then, in my mind's eye, I saw these families, like vibrant, tenacious wildflowers, pushing through the cracks in the pavement. Their insistent growth, a testament to an unyielding life force. The government is supposed to protect us, to guide us. But what if the ultimate protection, the ultimate guidance is found within these smaller units? What if the true infrastructure of a stable society isn't built with concrete and policy, but with empathy and shared experience? I noticed a teenager, earbuds firmly in place, leaning against a store window, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. He looked disconnected, an island in the sea of families. But then, a smaller child, a whirlwind of blue and yellow, bumped into him, dropping a bright red balloon. The teenager, without a word, picked up the balloon, his fingers momentarily brushing the child's. He reinflated it with a gentle puff of air and handed it back. A flicker of something akin to a smile touching his lips before he retreated back into his digital world. Even in the midst of apparent isolation, solace, there are these infinitesimal connections, a shared breath, a fleeting gesture. These are the whispers of a fundamental human, their need to connect, a need to transcend bureaucracy and political gridlock. I was so lost in this internal debate, this unfolding surrealist landscape of government versus family, that I barely registered the approaches of others. A friendly face from the podcasting community, a fellow dreamer with a microphone, approached me. Silas, fancy seeing you here. Lost in thought, I blinked, the mall world snapping back into sharp focus with a jolt. Oh, Sarah, yes. A little. Just observing. She followed my gaze, a knowing smile playing on her lips. The family convention. They always bring the energy. Energy, chaos, resilience. I murmured. My internal dialogue still a quiet echo. So she continued, her tone shifting to a more professional buzz. Are you going to cover the event on your podcast? I'm sure you'll find some fascinating dream logging in all this. I smiled. They're genuine this time. I think I might. It's funny, isn't it? The grand pronouncements from the national stage. And then, life. This, the quiet, insistent hum of it all. As Sarah and I began to discuss the technicalities of podcasting recording, microphone placement, ambient noise reduction, my mind continues its intricate dance. The government shutdown had created a vacuum, a void where abstract structures of power and provision were meant to be. But life, in its relentless, beautiful way, abhorred a vacuum, and it filled that space with these vibrant, pulsing units, these families, these small republics of love and resilience that continued to function, to grow, to be, regardless of the machinations of fairway halls. They talk of stimulus packages, of economic recovery, but the real stimulus, solace, the true recovery, is happening right here. It is the shared laughter over a ridiculous song. It is the gentle hand on a child's back. It's in the quiet understanding between partners navigating the everyday. This is the engine that truly drives us. This is the dream that persists. Even when the grand narratives falter, I thought about my own journey, from the intense physical world of welding to the introspective, often solitary world of podcasting. It had been a transition fueled by a need to express the internal landscapes I navigated. And in that space, I had found a different kind of strength, a different kind of purpose. Just as these families, in their own way, were forging their own resilient realities. But the government shutdown is a symptom, solace, a symptom of a system that has become too disconnected from the fundamental needs of its people. The families, they are the cure. They are the constant, the anchor, the living embodiment of what truly matters. I made my way through the bustling concourse, a more peaceful, almost serene individual than when I'd arrived. The overwhelming noise of the mall had transformed, in my perception, and the symphony of human existence. The government shutdown, a moment of national paralysis, had inadvertently illuminated the power and inherent strength of the family unit. It was a surreal dream, yes, but it was also a profound truth, a truth that resonated deeper than any news headline. And so, in the heart of a consumerist temple, during a time of national uncertainty, I stand here, a welder turned podcaster, and I witness the ultimate act of creation, the perpetuation of kindness, of connection, of hope, of hope. The government may be shut down, but the heart of humanity remains wide open. And that, Silas, is a dream worth broadcasting. I reached for my microphone, a small, sleek device that felt like an extension of my own being. I would take this experience, this internal conversation, this surreal yet inspiring realization, and I would weave it into the fabric of the alchemist's dream. Because sometimes the most profound truths are found not in the grand pronouncements of power, but in the quiet, relentless, and utterly beautiful resilience of the human spirit, playing out in all its glorious chaos within the bustling heart of the mall. And for that, for the continued existence of this vital, vibrant infrastructure, I was deeply, impressively grateful. My own dreams, like their lives, were fueled by this unwavering, persistent, and beautiful reality. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Narrative Mindset Podcast.